Okay, I can start us off. So we'll be talking a little bit about our lives as UT grad students and kind of fun things we like about Austin and the environment that we're in. So my name is Hannah Lungenheimer. I am starting my 4th year in the program, and I am in developmental psychology, and I've lived in Austin for, I think this is my 9th year. So I went to undergrad at UT as well. So I've been here a long time. So I have lots of knowledge about the Austin area, but I'll pass it over to Oina for her introduction.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Aina. I'm also going into my 4th year in the developmental area. And I have only been in Austin for 3-ish years. So just for my PhD. Prior to that, I spent some time in upstate New York where I did my undergrad degree, but I'm actually an international student originally coming from Hungary. So I've moved around quite a bit, and I definitely did have to also adjust to living in Austin. So I'm happy to talk about that as well, if that's of interest, of course.
Okay,
We
so
look at the questions, yeah.
well, I think they submitted questions, or we have a list of questions to go off of. So the first one, if we can just chat a little bit about what it's like living in Austin. So why don't you go first, and I'm going to throw you in there.
Well, I'm really happy about like the climate and the weather and the heat, because as much as I was born in a 4-season kind of continental environment, I do not like that. So I really enjoy just like, putting on shorts and a t-shirt and being able to just go outside pretty much every day. So I really like that about Austin. I like how much there's like nature spots and trails around. I've got into running since I've lived in Austin, and I go with a number of different groups, and we always go on different routes, different parts of town. So there's a lot of like fun things that I just enjoy about like the physical city of Austin and being here.
Yeah, the weather is very hot, as Oina said. You kind of adopt a new wardrobe if you're coming from a colder climate. But it's great because it means that you can spend a lot of your year outdoors. So if you enjoy being outside, it's a really good environment for that. There's lots of stuff to do. If you like, yeah, like Oina said, hiking or kayaking, or there's groups that meet at the parks, and there's plenty of outdoor activities that you can keep yourself busy with if you find yourself in Austin. I will say that it's generally like a large city, right? We're in an urban area. Although the public transportation is not as great as like other large cities. So because we're in Texas, I think we're a little more spread out of a city, right?
Yeah.
Versus like other major cities. But I would say the transportation can be tricky if you maybe don't have a car, don't have access to transportation. But it
Yeah.
is doable.
Right, but it is doable. I am the testament to that because I still don't have a car going into my 4th year. So with the combination of using the buses and obtaining a bike, I really would highly recommend, if you don't have a car, to get a bike. It's relatively easy. If you plan to live nearby the university, then it's easy to get to the university and to get to kind of like the downtown area where most of the interesting or important venues and places that you might want to go are. So it is definitely possible, but it's going to be a little bit trickier for sure.
Hey, Oina, as an international student, do you find time to go back home during the breaks? Maria is curious.
Mm-hmm. So I think you can definitely find time, and it's definitely a conversation to have with your advisor. But it also depends on how long. I mean, first of all, it depends on how far you live, right? So like for me, the travel already is a day, so it's really not worth it for me to go home just like 3 or 4 days. But maybe if you're coming from a country that's a little bit closer, it might be worth for you to even go home for a week or something like that. I find myself usually going home during the winter break period, because that's kind of the most quiet time in terms of research and everything, because that time between like Christmas and New Year's is really when nobody is on campus. There's not much research going on, and unless you're doing work with animals, you probably are fine to go home. But I know that a lot of people also just travel, whether they are international or not, during the summer as well. I also just frankly can't afford to go home twice a year. So that's part of the picture as well. But it's definitely a conversation that I think most PIs are very open for you to like leave. And a lot of the work we do in psychology can be definitely done remotely. So you might be able to go home for 2 or 3 weeks and actually end up working from home a week or two of that 3 week period.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Aina. What is our day-to-day, what does our day-to-day look like as grad students in Austin?
Yeah, that's a nice transition from what I said about talking to your PI about these things. Do you want to kind of get started, Hannah? And then
Yeah, it does vary, like depending on who your advisor is, depending on whether or not they want you in the lab. Um, some advisors are more lenient where you can work from home unless we're at meetings or whatever the case is. But I've had experience with both where I was in the office kind of like an 8 to 5-ish window, which was great for like building community with my team members, and you see a lot of people a lot more frequently. And I've also had experience working a lot from home and only coming in for classes or meetings, or if you have like an meetings with undergraduates or your TA classes, or you're running participants, right? So I think it really depends on what you and your advisor agree is best for your situation and kind of where you are at in your own research journey. So there are times where even though my advisor doesn't require it, I am on campus like 8 to 5 for a semester, right? If you're teaching and you have to TA and you're taking classes or, whatever the case is, it also fluctuates throughout your journey, I've found.
yeah, I think you pretty much covered everything. I think just the most, unless your PI states it very specifically in the beginning, it's important for you to like bring up and ask like, hey, what are the expectations? Do you want me to be here? Is it okay to work from home, right? And of course, it's going to vary, as I kind of briefly mentioned, if you work with animals or if you work with children and the families are only able to come in on the weekends, then you might end up finding yourself coming in on a weekend to test some kids. So, right, there's a lot of flexibility as well.
Yeah, that's true. And summer in developmental work is like prime time because
Yeah,
all kids are
exactly.
out of school. Okay, so we have what is work-life balance of a graduate student, and how often do graduate students travel for conferences, and are those conferences covered by grants and scholarships?
Okay, great questions. Um, I can maybe start with the traveling for conferences part of it. So I think again, it's going to really vary based on your department and the kind of work that you do. But I think typically no more than 1 or 2 conferences in a year, like major conferences where people like actually travel out of state to attend is typical for graduate students to attend. And there are multiple sources of department funding that is available. A lot of the conferences have actually their own kind of awards and scholarships that you can apply to, as well as maybe your PI specifically might have like some grant or something that they are able to support you. And typically you're able to apply for more grants if you are author or first author on some of these posters or talks or abstracts that you're submitting.
Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely funding opportunities. I haven't paid anything out of pocket to attend conferences, and I think I've attended like 4. And they do get pretty pricey. So there's lots of funding. You kind of just have to dig sometimes for it. But um,
Yeah. Should we talk a little more about the work-life balance?
yeah.
Okay.
Um, what is work-life balance of a graduate student, or how hard is it to manage work-life balance for us? I will say that it's gotten easier over time. I think my first year, I was like, if I'm not working 80 hours a week, like, what am I doing in graduate school? And maybe that was just my mindset going into it, but I spent a lot of time working my first 2 years, especially. And it took a long time, at least for me, to like take time for myself and kind of figure out my own groove. But I feel really confident over like my third year. I'm not saying it'll take 3 years for everybody, but For me personally, I had to kind of trust myself and kind of, figure out what I wanted to prioritize, right? Like taking yoga classes, right? That's not a bad thing to do.
Mm.
Or making time for friends, whatever the case is. So I think some people adjust to that a little bit easier than others. But yeah, Oina, do you have anything you want
Yeah,
to? Yeah.
I I think that's generally good advice. I try, if you're trying to be more specific, I try to keep a 9 to 5-ish schedule, but I'm not like beating myself up over it. So if I have to run an errand, if something comes up, I
Mhm.
will take care of that and then I will adjust my schedule, but also trying to like reserve the evenings to be free. Or I ended up going to a lot of running groups in the evenings. So those are like set times that I know I have to be out of the house. So that actually helps me to balance doing work before that time. But yeah, I think it's really important to pick up some other hobbies or other sports or other groups of friends or things that you are also just as regularly doing as working, because that will force you to like have times allocated where you're not allowed to work, and they actually find that makes you more productive in the time that you have remaining.
Mhm. How does our summer compare to our fall and spring semesters regarding like how busy we are? I think summer is the time where like I feel like, like if you're wearing a belt that's tight and you just like take it off and you can breathe, I feel like that's summer. It's a way for you to be like really productive if you want to be, and also not really feel guilty for like taking a break, right? It's a time for you to really kind of reset, because the fall semester and spring semesters are usually busy because either you're taking classes, um, usually the undergrad students that are in fall and spring semester classes are like more involved, so they're asking more questions, they're coming to office hours more, they're a little more, I don't know, just like stringent and needy in those
Yeah.
semesters. Um, and I feel I've also found that like grant deadlines and deadlines that you have to apply to like happen in the fall and spring, and there's not
Mhm.
really like too many summer deadlines. So that's another thing. So summer definitely does cool down a lot, at least in my experience, which is great.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. And I think, but you mentioned it earlier already, but there is some of the data collection that actually ramps up during the summer, especially when it comes to like kids, or at least that's what I can speak to, maybe collecting data with children. And so, but it's a different kind of, I find it less taxing than like sitting in front of a computer and like trying to write for hours and hours. It's kind of like more energizing, at least that's how I find it. So it's a different kind of work that you do during the summer, but there's definitely a lot more flexibility. A lot more people are in and out. Yeah, I end up finding myself spending less time on campus because nobody's ever there, so I don't feel like I want to be in empty rooms. But yeah, it's definitely a bit more relaxed time.
Yeah. Did we apply directly from undergrad or did we do a post batch or have other research experience before applying? What did you do, Ina?
So I did. Part of it was visa, part of it was COVID. It was a really stressful time applying in fall of 2019, but kind of starting my program in 2020 August. So I applied out of undergrad. I did have quite a bit of research experience. I had a full summer of full-time research experience working with kids. So I think that's what helped me decide that I wanted to do a PhD, but I wouldn't necessarily always recommend applying like directly from an undergrad. And Hannah, you had a slightly different experience, right?
Yeah, I didn't go straight in from undergrad. I took 3 years off in between. I did social work, case management for 2 years, and then I became a research lab manager for the year before I started grad school, just to kind of make sure that this is what I wanted to do. And then I applied and got in the first round, but Oina and I are also not in the clinical program, and I do know that, or as you might know, clinical a lot more students apply for those, positions, right? They're really kind of like hot topics, or yeah, a hot degree to get right now, because it's really interesting stuff and a lot of people are interested in it. So I would suggest that if you maybe if you haven't had any research experience or if you haven't had any clinical experience, just to get as much as you can, so that way you can be the most competitive applicant that you can be. So yeah, always having more research experience is good.
Yeah, that's a nice segue to this question
Yeah.
about research assistantships and teaching assistantships. So I didn't have any TA experience. I actually went to like a liberal arts college where there is no like higher level education other than undergrad. So there is no TAs because everyone is on the kind of same level. But I did have quite a bit of research assistantship experience doing research both at my own university, and I also ended up applying for internships, and I spent an entire summer at Michigan doing kind of like a full-time research assistantship, like testing a bunch of kids and basically doing that full-time for 3 months. So I think that's definitely important, and that actually might kind of help you decide whether you want to apply for the PhD immediately after undergrad, or kind of building up your experience and also deciding if this is for you or not. But I don't know, Hannah, did you have any TA experiences before?
Yeah, I was an undergraduate TA for one semester, and honestly, I don't think that it wasn't a very accurate representation of like being a graduate teaching assistant, but it really depends on the class and the instructor that you're paired up with. The classes are formatted different. Some of them are hybrid, some of them are fully remote and asynchronous, some of them are in person. So it really just depends on what class or professor you're paired up with for that semester, depending on like how stringent the work is, and how kind of the interactions with the students are. I've had some TA ships where I've had nobody in my office hours ever, and those are usually in the asynchronous classes, the online ones. But if you're in an in-person or like maybe a stats class or something that involves a little bit more work on the students, and you'll have a lot more visitors there. Does your research, oh, do we have time for another question, Joanne, or should we go on to the next session?
I think we can take a couple of more minutes.
Okay. So Myra asks if our research experience has to align exactly with the research we're hoping to pursue during our graduate program. In my experience, it did not. And I think that's okay. What about you, Aina?
It did and didn't. So I had a lot of experience working with kids. And then I started graduate school during the pandemic, as mentioned. And we kind of, with the lab that I was working in, we kind of pivoted to like surveying adult populations because that was just like much easier to do during the pandemic. So I had no experience in building surveys and studying adults because all I have done is ask kids, which friend would you like to play with, and those kind of things. But then now that the pandemic is over and I've also made some kind of changes in my own research program, I am going back to what I originally was very interested in doing, is working with kids. So I think yes and no. I think generally just having experience of working with people, maybe that's not even in a studying environment, but how like Hannah had it working as a social worker, just having interactions with different kinds of people. If you want to work with kids, I think it definitely is helpful if you have experience working with kids, whether that be a camp setting or something outside of research, that's fine. But yeah, I think as long as you have like a good personal statement and a good reason of why you're applying to a specific program and what you're hoping to accomplish and study during that program, I think your research experience doesn't have to be exactly of that.
I think we're going to address the last question in the next session, but if I may ask, could we wrap this up with some of the questions that were submitted earlier, especially focusing on what are some of the supports that we have for the students in the program, and any advice on how you can feel belonged here. And I think we can be honest about the triumph and struggles that we have in this aspect.
Yeah, so I think students are offered support partially through like the community aspect of being a graduate student. So you're not the only graduate student that'll be in the program, right? So leaning a lot on your peers is very helpful because you're kind of going through the process together. So that's a good area of support, but there's also lots of support and opportunities to get help, like through counseling services, and there's also like peer support groups, and some of like we have these like faculty liaisons where if you're maybe having like a conflict with your advisor and you don't really know how to approach the situation, you can talk to a liaison that's completely outside of your area that you know that doesn't really interact with your advisor a whole lot, to kind of just get a little bit of perspective, which I think is a unique resource to have for support for students, because it's sometimes tough having conversations with your advisor, or you need, you know, you go through lots of different areas in your relationship. So those liaisons are a pretty cool resource. What did I leave out, Ina? Yeah.
Something I have just 2 small points to make. Those are great, but I think one thing in terms of academic support that I find really helpful is the stats office hours that they hold every Friday, and there's a designated faculty who is always there, and there's also a peer student mentor, Anna, who's actually on this call right now, and so I find that really helpful because I don't always want to bug my advisor on like, did I run this right, or what does this mean, or why is this not working, and it's really nice to kind of have that support available and always there. So that I find really helpful in terms of academic support. And also, I am the co-chair of the diversity committee with Anna. And so we've been working on kind of building the community, and we put on a couple events during the year where we get together. We recently had our end of the semester kind of little picnic. That was a really nice, fun event. And I think one of our main goals is really just to kind of build a group of familiar faces, people that you know, because graduate school is very different. You might end up going multiple days without seeing many of your peers. Like you might talk to your advisor or may not, but definitely you can go maybe even weeks without seeing your peer unless you are actually proactive and reaching out. And so with the diversity committee, we're trying to create a platform where people can kind of mingle, get to know each other, and then hopefully form friendships afterward and carry that forward. And actually one of my favorite things that's kind of part of the diversity committee is we do this like first year mentorships. So we pair up those who are interested, but usually there's a pretty high interest, incoming PhD students with current PhD students. And they kind of form like a friendship or a brother sisterhood where they meet like once a month, but also they kind of become the first person that this first year student can ask questions, concerns. And a lot of these actually end up becoming like actual friendships. And it's really nice seeing that. So yeah, I think there is a good amount of support there. Again, you know, I'm an international student, have no family, no other friends before moving to Austin. And I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot now where I have a lot of social networks. So definitely being proactive is important, but there are some resources on campus.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I'm going to stop the recording for now.